The sky over the city of Denholt cracked open without warning. One moment, Grace Sullivan was pouring coffee into a paper cup at a small stand near the train station. The next, the ground shook so hard that the cup fell from her hand, and coffee splashed across her shoes. She looked up and saw something no one on Earth had ever seen before. A massive shape, dark and smooth like polished stone, hung silently above the clouds. It was not a plane. It was not a satellite falling from orbit. It was something else entirely, and it was not alone. Within minutes, 7 more shapes appeared over different cities across the world: London, Tokyo, Cairo, Toronto. Each one larger than the tallest buildings below it. People stopped walking. Cars stopped moving. Phones lit up with emergency alerts, but nobody needed a phone to know that something impossible had just happened. The world had changed in less than 60 seconds, and nobody yet understood how much. Grace ran. She did not know where she was running to, only that staying still felt wrong. Around her, people screamed, some frozen in place, staring upward with their mouths open. A woman clutched her child close to her chest. An old man dropped his cane and did not stop to pick it up. Grace's mind raced through 100 questions at once. Was this a joke? A hoax? A military test gone wrong? But deep down she already knew the truth. This was real, and it was only the beginning. At a military command center outside Washington, Colonel Ethan Marsh stood frozen in front of a wall of screens. Every radar system on the planet had gone silent for exactly 4 seconds before lighting up again with readings that made no sense. 8 objects, each larger than a small nation's entire navy combined, had appeared out of nowhere. No launch signature, no warning, no trace of how they arrived. It was as if they had simply stepped out of nothing and into the sky. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the phone, connecting him to the president. Before he could speak, static crackled through every communication channel in the building. Then a voice came through, cold and mechanical, speaking in perfect English despite not being human at all. The voice announced that Earth had 30 minutes to surrender all weapons and communication systems. It said resistance would be considered pointless and would only lead to greater loss. It did not explain who they were, where they came from, or what they wanted with the planet. It simply demanded obedience, and then the transmission ended. Panic spread like wildfire. Stock markets crashed within minutes. Airports shut down. Emergency broadcasts interrupted television and radio around the globe, warning citizens to remain indoors and await further instructions. But instructions could not calm the fear rising in millions of hearts. People filled churches, mosques, and temples. Others hoarded food and water, certain the end of the world had finally come. In New York City, a young teacher named Nathan Pierce stood outside his apartment building, staring at the object hovering above the skyline. His students had been dismissed early, sent home to frightened parents. Nathan had nowhere else to go, so he simply stood there, watching, waiting, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. 30 minutes passed in near silence. No government responded to the ultimatum. No leader dared to speak first. And then, exactly on schedule, the first attack began. A beam of blinding light shot down from the ship above Denholt, striking an empty field just outside the city. The impact was massive, throwing dust and debris into the sky, shaking windows for miles around. It was not aimed at people. It was a warning shot, a demonstration of power meant to break the world's resistance before it even began. Grace felt the shockwave from 3 streets away. The force nearly knocked her off her feet. Car alarms blared in every direction. Somewhere behind her, a building's windows shattered from the pressure of the blast. She pressed herself against a wall, heart pounding, trying to process what she had just witnessed. This was not a warning anyone could ignore. At the Pentagon, Colonel Marsh watched the reports come in from around the world. Every capital city had received a similar demonstration. Fields destroyed near London, a mountain half-leveled near Beijing, coastlines scorched near Sydney. The message was clear: comply, or face complete destruction. But something strange caught Ethan's attention. Despite the terrifying show of force, the enemy ships had not moved from their exact positions since arrival. They hovered perfectly still, as if anchored to invisible points in the sky. It was a small detail, but Ethan's training told him small details mattered most in moments like these. He called for General Whitfield, the head of a classified defense program that few people, even within the military, knew existed. It was known only by a short designation, Project Halcyon. For 11 years, a small group of scientists and engineers had worked in secret beneath a mountain in Nevada, developing technology based on fragments of unexplained material, discovered decades earlier, in remote parts of the world. Nobody outside the project had ever confirmed what that material truly was, only that it did not behave like anything found naturally on Earth. General Daniel Whitfield answered the call within seconds. His voice was steady, though the tension underneath it was impossible to hide completely. He told Ethan that the project was ready, that after years of failures and setbacks, the final tests had succeeded only weeks earlier. Whether it would work against a real, active threat remained unknown, but there was no more time left to wait and prepare further. The moment had arrived, ready or not. As night began to fall in different time zones around the world, cities that had once glowed with lights now sat mostly dark, save for emergency vehicles and the eerie glow of the alien ships above. Fear had replaced routine. Families huddled together in basements and shelters. Soldiers took up positions they hoped they would never need to use. In Denholt, Grace finally reached her apartment building, breathless and shaking. Her neighbor, a young woman named Sophie Callahan, was already outside, phone in hand, trying desperately to reach her family in another city. The two women, strangers until that moment, stood together in silence, watching the impossible shape in the sky, both wondering the same unspoken question: would tomorrow even come? Inside the underground facility in Nevada, General Whitfield walked briskly through a hallway lined with monitors and control panels. Engineers rushed past him, carrying tablets and shouting updates to one another. In the center of the facility sat a massive structure, unlike anything built before, a defense system designed not simply to fight the enemy, but to disable their advanced technology entirely. It had a simple, quiet name among the team who built it. They called it the Key. Whitfield reached the main control room, where a small team waited for his orders. Among them was Dr. Olivia Grant, the lead scientist behind the project, and her closest colleague, engineer Ryan Fletcher. Both had spent over a decade of their lives dedicated to this single moment, unsure if it would ever actually come. Now that it had, the weight of responsibility rested heavily on their shoulders. Olivia turned to Whitfield, her expression calm but her eyes filled with quiet determination. She told him the system was fully charged and ready for activation. However, there was a risk. This would be the very first time the key had been used in real conditions, against an actual threat, rather than a simulation. Nobody could guarantee it would work exactly as planned. Whitfield nodded slowly, understanding the danger, but knowing there was no other option left. He gave the order to prepare full activation, effective the moment the enemy launched their next attack. It was a gamble, but it was the only gamble humanity had left to make. Meanwhile, across the ocean in London, Prime Minister's advisors gathered around a long table, debating what should be done next. Some argued for immediate surrender, believing resistance would only bring more destruction. Others insisted that giving up without a fight would doom humanity to a future none of them could predict or control. The debate grew heated, voices rising with fear and desperation, until a message arrived from the American government, informing them of Project Halcyon's existence for the very first time. Disbelief spread through the room. A secret weapon, hidden from the world for over a decade, now their only hope of survival? It seemed almost too incredible to believe. Yet at this point, incredible things were becoming the only kind of thing left in the world. Back in Denholt, Grace and Sophie sat together on the rooftop of their apartment building, unable to sleep, unable to look away from the sky. The ship above them remained still, its presence a constant reminder of how fragile their world had suddenly become. Grace thought about her parents in another state, wondering if they were safe, wondering if she would ever see them again. Suddenly, the ship's surface shimmered, and a low hum echoed across the city, growing louder with each passing second. Grace grabbed Sophie's arm instinctively, both women bracing for what might come next. Around the world, similar sounds began rising from each of the 8 ships simultaneously, as if some invisible signal had triggered them all at once. The countdown, though nobody could see a clock, had truly begun. Somewhere beneath a mountain in Nevada, engineers watched their monitors flash with warnings. Somewhere above cities across the globe, ancient weapons designed by unknown minds prepared to strike again, and somewhere in the hearts of billions of people, a single fragile hope remained, that when humanity finally fought back, it would be enough. Ethan Marsh stood in the command center, staring at the countdown clock now displayed prominently on the main screen, ticking down the estimated time before enemy ships would begin a coordinated, large-scale assault. 5 hours. That was the number staring back at him, cold and unforgiving. 5 hours, until everything either ended or truly began. He looked around the room at the exhausted, frightened faces of everyone gathered there, then took a deep breath and spoke the words that would set humanity's response into motion. It was time to fight back, not with fear, but with everything they had left. The world was no longer waiting to see what would happen. It was time to make something happen. As the final light of day faded over the horizon, the 8 ships above Earth's greatest cities remained perfectly still, patient, confident, unaware that beneath the surface of the very planet they intended to conquer, humanity was preparing an answer no one, not even the enemy, could have predicted. Deep beneath the Nevada mountain, the air inside the control room felt heavy with tension. Every screen glowed with numbers, graphs, and warnings, each one representing a piece of the plan that had taken over a decade to build. Dr. Olivia Grant moved quickly between stations, checking readings, confirming calculations, and trying to keep her voice steady, even though her heart pounded harder with every passing minute. General Whitfield stood beside her, watching the main display where the 5-hour countdown continued ticking downward. He had spent years preparing for a moment like this, yet nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of it now unfolding. The world above them was frightened, uncertain, and looking for answers that only this small team could provide. Ryan Fletcher, the lead engineer, called out from across the room, confirming that the key's core systems were stable and holding steady power levels. It was good news, but Olivia knew better than to celebrate too early. The system had never been tested against a real, living threat. Simulations, no matter how advanced, could never fully predict what would happen once actual alien technology entered the equation. Whitfield turned to Olivia and asked the question that had been sitting quietly in the back of everyone's mind since the ships first appeared. He asked if she believed the key would truly work. Olivia paused before answering, choosing her words carefully. She said that belief was not the same as certainty, but that everything they had built pointed toward success. It was the most honest answer she could give, and in a moment like this, honesty mattered more than false comfort. Above ground, the world continued to spiral into chaos. News channels broadcast non-stop coverage of the alien ships, hovering silently over major cities. Some reporters spoke in calm, professional tones despite the terror clearly visible in their eyes. Others broke down entirely, unable to maintain composure as they described scenes of empty streets, abandoned vehicles, and families fleeing toward whatever shelter they could find. In Denholt, Grace Sullivan and Sophie Callahan remained on the rooftop, unable to look away from the massive shape hovering above their city. The hum they had heard earlier continued steadily, low and constant, like a machine warming up before beginning its true purpose. Grace's phone buzzed suddenly, and she nearly dropped it in surprise. It was a message from her father, simple and short, telling her that he loved her and that he hoped to see her again soon. Tears filled her eyes as she read it, but she forced herself to stay calm. Falling apart now would help no one, least of all herself. Sophie squeezed her hand gently, offering silent comfort neither of them could fully put into words. Around the world, millions of similar moments were happening at once. Strangers and loved ones alike reaching out to each other, holding on to whatever connection still remained in a world suddenly turned upside down. At the United Nations headquarters, an emergency session had been called, bringing together leaders and representatives from nearly every nation on Earth. For the first time in history, borders and old rivalries seemed to matter less than the shared threat now facing every single person on the planet. Arguments still broke out, fear driving some toward hostility, rather than unity. But beneath the tension, a fragile sense of cooperation began to form. The Secretary General addressed the gathered representatives, informing them officially of Project Halcyon, and the plan now underway to activate it. Reactions varied wildly. Some leaders expressed cautious hope, grateful that any plan existed at all. Others voiced anger, demanding to know why such technology had been kept secret for so long, hidden even from many of the world's most powerful governments. A representative from a smaller nation stood and asked a question that echoed the fears of many in the room. If the key failed, what other options remained? The Secretary General had no comforting answer to offer. The truth was simple and painful. If the plan failed, there was no backup, no second secret weapon waiting in reserve. Project Halcyon represented humanity's single greatest chance at survival. Back in Nevada, Whitfield received word of the meeting's outcome. Despite disagreements, world leaders had agreed to support the activation of the key, understanding that unity, however forced by desperation, was now essential. He relayed the news to his team, and for a brief moment, something resembling hope flickered across their exhausted faces. Olivia returned her focus to the monitors, running one final check on the system's core components. She explained to Whitfield that the key worked by generating a powerful energy field capable of disrupting advanced technological systems within a certain radius. In theory, this field would interfere with the enemy ship's primary functions, including their weapons, shields, and communication systems, effectively leveling the playing field between humanity and its far more advanced opponent. However, she cautioned that the field required a significant amount of time to fully charge before reaching maximum effectiveness. Rushing the process risked catastrophic failure, potentially destroying the very system meant to save them. Patience, though difficult given the circumstances, remained absolutely necessary. Ethan Marsh, monitoring communications from the Pentagon, relayed constant updates between Nevada and military leaders stationed around the globe. Fighter jets, though vastly outmatched by the alien ships in raw power, prepared to take to the skies regardless, ready to provide any support possible once the key activated. Naval vessels moved into strategic positions along coastlines, while ground forces braced themselves near major cities, uncertain exactly what role they would play once the true battle began. As the hours ticked by, small acts of courage began to emerge from the chaos. In Tokyo, a group of engineers worked tirelessly to keep power grids functioning, ensuring hospitals and emergency services remained operational, despite the citywide panic surrounding them. In Cairo, volunteers organized shelters for families who had lost their homes during the earlier demonstration strikes. In Toronto, teachers like Nathan Pierce opened their doors to frightened neighbors, offering whatever comfort and safety they could provide. Nathan sat with a small group of families inside his apartment building's community room, trying to keep the children calm by reading stories aloud, his voice steady despite the fear churning inside him. A young boy named Oliver Hastings, no older than 8, asked Nathan if the monsters in the sky were going to hurt them. Nathan knelt down to the boy's level and told him gently that brave people all over the world were working hard to keep everyone safe. It was not a perfect answer, but it was the truest comfort he could offer in that moment. Back beneath the Nevada mountain, the countdown continued steadily downward. 4 hours remained. Olivia Grant stood in front of the main console, watching energy levels rise slowly within the key's core systems. Every increase, however small, brought them one step closer to being ready. Yet with every passing minute, the risk of enemy attack grew higher as well. The world was racing against time in more ways than one. General Whitfield received an urgent call from a satellite monitoring station, reporting subtle changes in the enemy ship's formation. Though still hovering in place, sensors detected slight increases in energy output from each vessel, suggesting preparations for another attack were already underway. The initial demonstration strikes, devastating as they were, had only been a warning. The next assault, whenever it came, would likely be far more severe. Whitfield relayed this information to Olivia, who nodded grimly, understanding the implications clearly. They needed more time, yet time was quickly running out. She ordered her team to push the charging process as far as safely possible, without risking system failure, hoping desperately that it would be enough when the moment finally arrived. Ethan Marsh coordinated closely with military leaders across the globe, establishing a synchronized defense strategy designed to activate the moment the key reached full power. Every available resource, from advanced fighter squadrons to experimental energy weapons developed in smaller, lesser-known research programs, would be brought together in a single coordinated effort. It was a plan built on desperation and hope in equal measure, but it was the only plan they had. In Denholt, The hum from the ship above grew steadily louder, vibrating through windows and walls throughout the city. Grace and Sophie retreated indoors, joining several other neighbors gathered nervously in the building's lobby. Someone had brought a small radio, tuning it to emergency broadcasts providing updates on the situation as it developed. Though details remained limited for security reasons, the broadcasts confirmed that a coordinated global defense effort was underway, offering a small but meaningful sense of reassurance to those listening. An elderly woman named Claire Bishop, who lived on the building's top floor, sat quietly in the corner, clutching a small wooden cross in her hands. She had lived through wars before, though nothing like this. She whispered softly to herself, words of prayer meant to calm her own racing heart. Grace watched her for a moment, feeling a strange sense of comfort in witnessing someone else's quiet strength during such an overwhelming moment. As the countdown reached 3 hours remaining, tension inside the Nevada facility grew almost unbearable. Ryan Fletcher called out sudden readings showing a spike in energy fluctuation within the key's core. For a brief, terrifying moment, alarms blared throughout the control room, warning of a potential system overload. Olivia rushed to the main console, quickly adjusting settings, her hands moving with practiced precision, despite the fear gripping her chest. After several agonizing seconds, the alarms fell silent, and the readings stabilized once more. Olivia exhaled deeply, relief washing over her exhausted face. She explained to Whitfield that the fluctuation had been caused by an unexpected surge in ambient energy, likely originating from the alien ship's own increasing power output. It was a warning sign, a clear indication that time was becoming an increasingly dangerous factor in their plan. Whitfield contacted world leaders once more, informing them of the situation's urgency. He requested that all remaining preparations be finalized as quickly as possible, knowing that whatever time remained before the enemy's next attack could no longer be relied upon with certainty. The world listened, and across every continent, final preparations accelerated with renewed urgency. As night fully settled over half the world, the other half prepared to face the coming battle beneath the bright light of day. Soldiers checked their equipment one final time. Scientists monitored their instruments with unwavering focus. Ordinary citizens held their loved ones close, uncertain what the coming hours would bring, yet unwilling to give up hope entirely. Beneath the Nevada mountain, Olivia Grant stood once more before the main console, watching the countdown steadily approach its final stages. 2 hours remained. She turned to General Whitfield, her voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes, and confirmed that the key would reach full charge precisely on schedule, assuming no further complications arose. Whitfield nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He told her that regardless of what happened next, her work, and the work of her entire team, represented humanity's greatest achievement in the face of impossible odds. Whatever the outcome, they had given the world its best possible chance at survival. Above them, the enemy ships continued their silent, patient wait, unaware of the storm quietly gathering beneath the surface of the planet they intended to claim as their own. The world held its breath, caught between fear and fragile hope, as the final hours before humanity's answer continued steadily ticking away. At exactly 2 hours remaining, the silence over Denholt shattered. The ship above the city released a sudden burst of light, brighter than anything Grace Sullivan had ever witnessed. This time, it did not strike an empty field. It struck the edge of the city itself, tearing through several blocks near the harbor. The ground shook violently, throwing Grace and Sophie to the floor of the apartment lobby. Dust and smoke poured through the streets outside, visible even from the building's windows. Screams echoed from somewhere nearby, followed by the sound of sirens rising in the distance. Claire Bishop gripped her wooden cross tighter, whispering her prayers faster now, her voice trembling. Grace pulled herself up from the floor, helping Sophie to her feet, both women shaking but unharmed. The warning phase, it seemed, had officially ended. The true assault had begun. Across the world, similar attacks erupted almost simultaneously. London's outer districts suffered a direct strike near an industrial complex, sending flames rising high into the night sky. Tokyo's coastline was struck by a wave of energy that flooded several low-lying streets. Cairo, Toronto, Sydney, Beijing, each city faced its own moment of terror as the enemy ships unleashed their long-awaited assault. Inside the Nevada facility, alarms blared through the control room as reports flooded in from every corner of the globe. General Whitfield watched the screens with a tightening grip on the edge of the console, his jaw clenched as casualty estimates began appearing across multiple monitors. Olivia Grant remained focused on her own station, refusing to let the chaos outside distract her from the critical work still remaining. She reported that the key had reached 92% charge, faster than originally projected, likely due to the increased ambient energy created by the enemy's own attacks. It was a strange twist of fate, the very weapons meant to destroy humanity now inadvertently helping to power the one system capable of stopping them. Whitfield ordered the team to push forward, preparing for early activation if necessary. Ethan Marsh, coordinating from the Pentagon, relayed urgent instructions to military units stationed near affected cities. Fighter jets scrambled into the air despite the overwhelming danger, tasked with providing what limited support they could to emergency response teams working desperately to rescue survivors trapped beneath collapsed structures. It was a dangerous, thankless mission, but soldiers around the world answered the call without hesitation. In Toronto, Nathan Pierce felt the tremor from a strike several miles away, the impact strong enough to rattle windows throughout his apartment building. The children gathered around him cried out in fear, and Nathan quickly gathered them closer, speaking calmly, despite his own racing heart. Oliver Hastings, the young boy from earlier, buried his face against Nathan's shoulder, trembling. Nathan held him gently, whispering reassurances he desperately hoped were true. Outside, emergency crews rushed toward the site of impact, working alongside soldiers and volunteers to clear debris and search for survivors. Amid the destruction, small moments of courage and kindness emerged. A firefighter carried an injured stranger to safety. A group of teenagers formed a human chain, passing buckets of water toward a small fire threatening to spread. Even in the darkest moments, humanity's resilience refused to fade entirely. Back in Nevada, the countdown reached 1 hour and 30 minutes remaining. Ryan Fletcher called out sudden readings, indicating the key had reached 97% charge. Olivia Grant moved quickly between stations, double-checking every calculation, aware that even the smallest miscalculation could mean catastrophic failure at the most critical moment. General Whitfield received an urgent transmission from satellite monitoring stations, warning that enemy ships were beginning to shift position for the first time since their arrival. It appeared the initial assault had only been the beginning of a much larger, coordinated attack, designed to weaken humanity's defenses before delivering a final, decisive blow. Time had officially run out for careful planning. Now, only action remained. Whitfield gave the order. The key would activate the moment it reached full charge, regardless of remaining preparations elsewhere around the world. Olivia nodded, understanding the weight of the decision, and turned back to her console, watching the numbers climb steadily toward 100%. Ethan Marsh relayed the update to military commanders across the globe, instructing all forces to prepare for immediate engagement once activation occurred. Fighter squadrons adjusted their formations. Naval vessels moved into final defensive positions. Ground forces near major cities braced themselves, weapons ready, eyes fixed upward toward the silent, looming shapes still hovering above. In Denholt, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Emergency services struggled to keep pace with the destruction spreading through the harbor district. Grace Sullivan, unable to simply sit and wait any longer, volunteered alongside several neighbors to help distribute supplies to displaced families gathering in a nearby shelter. Sophie Callahan joined her, both women finding a strange sense of purpose amid the surrounding chaos, their fear replaced temporarily by focused determination to help however they could. At the shelter, Grace met a young mother named Emma Carter, cradling a sleeping infant in her arms, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. Emma explained that her husband had been working near the harbor when the strike occurred, and she had not heard from him since. Grace sat beside her, offering quiet comfort, unable to promise anything certain, yet unwilling to leave her alone in such a painful moment of uncertainty. Meanwhile, beneath the Nevada mountain, the countdown reached its final minutes. Olivia Grant stood rigidly before the main console, watching the charge indicator climb toward its final threshold. 98%. 99%. The entire control room fell into tense silence, every engineer and scientist holding their breath, watching the numbers with unwavering focus. Then, finally, The indicator reached 100%. The key was fully charged and ready for activation. General Whitfield turned to Olivia, his expression a mixture of hope and grim determination. He asked if she was ready. Olivia took a deep breath, steadying her nerves, and confirmed that everything humanity had worked toward for over a decade now rested on this single moment. She gave the order to begin activation sequence. Ryan Fletcher's hands moved swiftly across the console, initiating the final startup procedures. Deep beneath the mountain, powerful machinery hummed to life, energy flowing through massive conduits built specifically for this singular purpose. The entire facility trembled slightly as the key's core systems engaged fully for the very first time under real-world conditions. Above ground, satellites detected an enormous surge of energy, originating from the Nevada facility, spreading outward across the planet in a massive, invisible wave. Within seconds, the wave reached the enemy ships, hovering above cities around the globe, washing over their advanced hulls like an unseen tide. Inside the alien vessel above Denholt, systems that had operated flawlessly for the entirety of their advance suddenly flickered and destabilized. Lights along the ship's exterior dimmed briefly before flashing erratically. The low, constant hum that had echoed across the city for hours suddenly faltered, stuttering unevenly. Grace Sullivan, standing outside the shelter with Sophie and several others, watched in stunned disbelief as the massive ship above them shuddered visibly, its perfect stillness finally broken for the first time since its arrival. Murmurs of confusion and cautious hope spread quickly among the gathered crowd. Across the world, similar reactions occurred simultaneously. In London, the ship hovering above the city dipped slightly, as though struggling to maintain its previous altitude. In Tokyo, energy readings from the alien vessel spiked wildly, before dropping sharply. In Cairo, the ship's weapons, previously glowing with a steady, ominous light, flickered and went dark entirely. At the Pentagon, Ethan Marsh watched the incoming reports with growing disbelief and cautious excitement. Every monitoring station around the globe confirmed the same pattern. The enemy ships were losing power rapidly, their advanced systems disrupted by the massive energy field generated by the key. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity held a genuine advantage. Whitfield gave the order for military forces to launch a coordinated counterattack, taking full advantage of the enemy's sudden vulnerability. Fighter jets that had previously seemed powerless against the alien ships now moved in swiftly, targeting weakened systems along each vessel's exterior. Naval vessels fired precision strikes toward ships positioned above coastal cities, while ground-based defense systems activated in unison, launching coordinated assaults toward targets now finally within reach. In Denholt, military aircraft roared overhead, moving toward the destabilized ship still hovering above the harbor district. Grace watched from below, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and cautious hope, as bright flashes of return fire illuminated the night sky. The battle, so long anticipated and feared, had finally truly begun. Inside the Nevada facility, Olivia Grant monitored the key's performance closely, adjusting output levels carefully to maintain the disruption field at maximum effectiveness. Ryan Fletcher called out continuous updates, confirming that enemy systems across the globe remained destabilized, giving human forces a critical window of opportunity to press their advantage. General Whitfield watched the unfolding battle across dozens of monitors, his expression tense but filled with renewed determination. For years, he had wondered if this moment would ever truly arrive, and now that it had, the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever before. Yet beneath that weight, a fragile sense of hope had finally begun to take root. Ethan Marsh coordinated closely with commanders stationed around the world, ensuring that every available resource was directed toward exploiting the enemy's sudden weakness. Reports began flowing in of enemy ships sustaining visible damage for the first time since their arrival. Small explosions flickered along their previously invincible hulls, visible evidence that humanity's counterattack was finally having a genuine effect. In Toronto, Nathan Pierce and the families sheltering with him watched anxiously through nearby windows as distant flashes of light illuminated the night sky, evidence of the ongoing battle taking place above their city. Oliver Hastings, still trembling slightly, asked Nathan if this meant the good guys were winning. Nathan offered a small, hopeful smile, telling the boy that it certainly looked that way, though the fight was clearly far from over. Back at the shelter in Denholt, Emma Carter received a message from her husband, confirming that he had survived the earlier strike and was safely making his way toward the shelter. Relief washed over her exhausted face, tears streaming freely as she thanked Grace for staying by her side during the frightening wait. Grace squeezed her hand gently, grateful to witness even a small moment of hope amid such overwhelming uncertainty. As the battle raged onward across multiple continents, the tide continued shifting steadily in humanity's favor. Enemy ships, once seemingly invincible, now struggled visibly against the coordinated assault unleashed upon them. Weapons flickered weakly, shields failed intermittently. The once silent, patient invaders now found themselves facing an unexpected and increasingly effective resistance. Inside the Nevada facility, General Whitfield received word that the ship above Cairo had suffered critical damage, forcing it to retreat higher into the atmosphere, away from the reach of ground-based defenses. It was the first confirmed instance of an enemy vessel actively withdrawing from engagement, a small but significant victory representing the shifting balance of power now unfolding across the globe. Olivia Grant allowed herself a brief moment of cautious relief, though she remained fully focused on maintaining the key's stability throughout the ongoing battle. She understood that victory, while increasingly within reach, remained far from guaranteed. The enemy, though weakened, still possessed significant strength, and the coming hours would ultimately determine humanity's true fate. As reports continued flooding in from military forces around the world, a fragile yet undeniable sense of hope began spreading through command centers on every continent. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity was no longer simply defending itself. It was actively fighting back, and against all previous expectations, it was beginning to win. Inside the Nevada facility, Ryan Fletcher suddenly called out a warning, his voice sharp with concern. The enemy ships, despite their weakened state, appeared to be adapting. Sensors detected a rapid change in their internal systems, as though the alien technology was attempting to reroute power away from damaged components, in an effort to counteract the disruption field generated by the key. Olivia Grant leaned over her console, quickly analyzing the incoming data. She confirmed that the enemy was indeed adjusting, though slowly, their advanced systems struggling to compensate for the ongoing interference. It was a troubling development, proof that the key's effect, while powerful, was not entirely permanent or absolute. Time remained a critical factor in determining the ultimate outcome of the battle. General Whitfield ordered an immediate increase in the key's output, hoping to overwhelm the enemy's attempts at adaptation before they could fully recover. Olivia hesitated only briefly, aware of the risks involved in pushing the system beyond its previously tested limits, before nodding firmly and initiating the requested adjustment. The machinery deep within the facility groaned under the increased strain, but held steady, continuing to generate the powerful field now spreading across the globe. Above Denholt, the enemy ship's flickering lights suddenly steadied briefly, its weapons beginning to glow faintly once more. Grace Sullivan watched nervously from the shelter's entrance, fear creeping back into her chest as the brief moment of hope seemed to waver. Around her, murmurs of concern rippled through the gathered crowd, everyone sensing the sudden shift in the battle's momentum. Fighter jets circling above quickly adjusted their tactics, launching a renewed wave of precision strikes toward the ship's weakened points before its systems could fully stabilize. Explosions flashed brightly against the vessel's dark hull, illuminating the night sky with brief, dramatic bursts of light. The ship shuddered violently under the renewed assault, its weapons flickering once more before falling silent again. At the Pentagon, Ethan Marsh watched the exchange with intense focus, relaying updated tactical instructions to commanders stationed around the world. He emphasized the importance of maintaining constant pressure, denying the enemy any opportunity to fully recover from the ongoing disruption. Every second mattered now more than ever. In London, similar scenes unfolded above the city skyline. The enemy vessel, having briefly regained partial functionality, attempted to retaliate against the coordinated human assault. A powerful beam of energy shot downward, narrowly missing a formation of fighter jets maneuvering swiftly to avoid the attack. The near miss sent a wave of tension through command centers monitoring the engagement, a stark reminder that despite recent successes, the enemy remained dangerous and unpredictable. Ground-based defense systems near London quickly responded, launching a concentrated barrage toward the source of the attack. The combined force of multiple precision strikes finally overwhelmed the ship's weakened defenses, causing a significant portion of its outer hull to rupture violently. Flames and debris scattered across the night sky, drawing gasps and cheers from anxious onlookers watching from below. Inside the Nevada facility, Olivia Grant monitored the increasing intensity of the key's output carefully, aware that sustaining such elevated levels for an extended period carried significant risk. She informed General Whitfield that the system could maintain its current output for approximately 2 more hours before requiring a brief cooldown period, a limitation that added further urgency to the already tense situation unfolding worldwide. Whitfield relayed this information to Ethan Marsh, emphasizing the need for military forces to capitalize fully on the current advantage before the key's effectiveness potentially diminished. Ethan quickly coordinated with commanders across the globe, urging an accelerated, more aggressive approach toward neutralizing the remaining enemy vessels as swiftly and decisively as possible. In Toronto, the battle above the city reached a critical turning point. The enemy ship, already weakened significantly by earlier strikes, attempted a final desperate maneuver, attempting to retreat toward higher altitude in hopes of escaping the disruption field's reach. Fighter jets pursued relentlessly, launching a final coordinated assault before the vessel could successfully withdraw beyond effective range. Nathan Pierce and the families sheltering with him watched anxiously through the windows as the distant battle intensified, flashes of light and distant rumbling sounds echoing across the city skyline. Oliver Hastings gripped Nathan's hand tightly, his earlier fear now mixed with cautious excitement, as reports of the enemy's retreat spread quickly among those gathered in the community room. Finally, after several tense minutes, the Toronto ship suffered a critical, decisive blow, its systems failing entirely as it began drifting uncontrollably, before finally crashing into a remote, uninhabited area outside the city. Cheers erupted throughout the community room, relief and joy replacing the fear that had gripped everyone for hours. Nathan hugged Oliver tightly, unable to hold back his own tears of relief. Similar victories began occurring across the globe in rapid succession. The ship above Sydney, already struggling against sustained attacks, finally lost power entirely, crashing harmlessly into the ocean several miles offshore. In Beijing, coordinated ground and air strikes finally breached the enemy vessel's remaining defenses, forcing it into an uncontrolled descent that ended in a remote mountainous region far from populated areas. At the Pentagon, Ethan Marsh received update after update, each one confirming another successful engagement against the weakened enemy forces. He allowed himself a small, cautious smile, though he remained fully aware that the battle was far from completely over. 2 ships remained active, including the vessel still hovering above Den Holt, and both continued posing significant threats despite their weakened state. Inside the Nevada facility, Olivia Grant watched the key's output levels closely, aware that time remaining before the required cooldown period continued steadily decreasing. She informed General Whitfield that approximately 45 minutes remained before the system would need to temporarily reduce its output, potentially allowing the remaining enemy vessels a brief window to recover. Whitfield relayed this critical information immediately to Ethan Marsh, emphasizing the urgent need to neutralize the remaining threats before the key's effectiveness diminished. Ethan quickly redirected available forces toward Den Holt and the second remaining active vessel located above a remote region near the Arctic Circle, coordinating a final, decisive push against humanity's last remaining obstacles. Above Den Holt, the battle intensified dramatically as additional fighter squadrons arrived to reinforce the ongoing assault. Grace Sullivan watched from the shelter's entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination, as bright flashes of light illuminated the night sky in rapid succession. The enemy ship, though severely weakened, continued resisting fiercely, its remaining weapons firing sporadically toward the surrounding aircraft. A stray blast from the ship struck a nearby building, sending debris scattering across the street below. Grace instinctively pulled several nearby civilians back toward the shelter's entrance, helping ensure everyone remained safely out of harm's way, despite the chaos unfolding around them. Sophie Callahan joined her, both women working together instinctively to keep those around them calm and protected. Emma Carter, reunited briefly with her husband, watched anxiously alongside Grace and Sophie as the battle raged onward above the city. her husband, exhausted and covered in dust from his earlier ordeal near the harbor, held their sleeping infant close, silently praying for the battle's swift and successful conclusion. Finally, after several more intense minutes, a concentrated strike from multiple fighter jets breached the Denholt ship's remaining defenses entirely. The vessel shuddered violently, flames erupting along its damaged hull, before beginning an uncontrolled descent toward the harbor waters below. Cheers and relieved sobs erupted throughout the crowd gathered near the shelter, the overwhelming tension of the past several hours finally beginning to lift. Grace watched the ship's final descent with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming relief, tears streaming freely down her face as Sophie embraced her tightly. Around them, strangers who had spent the entire ordeal together as reluctant companions, now celebrated together as something closer to a community bound by shared survival. At the Nevada facility, General Whitfield received confirmation of the Denholt vessel's destruction, immediately relaying the news to Ethan Marsh and the rest of the coordinating command centers worldwide. Only one enemy ship remained active, hovering above the remote Arctic region, its systems severely weakened but not yet entirely disabled. Olivia Grant, monitoring the key's remaining output capacity closely, informed Whitfield that approximately 15 minutes remained before the system would require its scheduled cooldown period. Time was running critically short, but with only a single enemy vessel remaining, humanity's forces stood poised to deliver one final, decisive blow before the disruption field's temporary limitations came into effect. Ethan Marsh coordinated swiftly with military forces stationed near the Arctic region, directing a concentrated final assault toward the last remaining threat. Fighter jets, previously engaged in other successful battles across the globe, redirected swiftly toward the remote location, joining forces already positioned nearby in preparation for the war's final, decisive confrontation. As the countdown toward the key's cooldown period continued steadily ticking downward, the world watched with bated breath, hoping desperately that humanity's hard-fought victories throughout the night would culminate in one final, complete triumph before time ultimately ran out. Above the remote Arctic region, the last remaining enemy vessel hovered against a backdrop of endless white snow and dark, star-filled sky. Unlike the other ships, this one had not yet suffered significant damage, having remained largely stationary and defensive throughout the earlier stages of the battle. Its systems, though affected by the key's disruption field, remained more stable than those of its destroyed counterparts, making it the most formidable remaining obstacle standing between humanity and complete victory. A joint squadron of fighter jets, gathered from multiple nations working together for the very first time in true, coordinated unity, approached the vessel cautiously. Pilots from different countries, speaking different languages, communicated through a shared military channel, coordinating their movements with practiced precision, despite having never trained together before this moment. Necessity had forged an alliance stronger than any treaty signed in peacetime. Leading the formation was a pilot named Henry Dawson, a seasoned veteran who had spent the past several hours engaged in near-constant combat above cities around the globe. Exhausted but resolute, he radioed final instructions to the surrounding aircraft, emphasizing the importance of a precise, coordinated strike, given the limited time remaining before the key's temporary shutdown. Inside the Nevada facility, Olivia Grant watched the countdown with growing anxiety, aware that every passing second brought them closer to the system's scheduled cooldown. She informed General Whitfield that they had approximately 10 minutes remaining before output levels would need to decrease significantly, potentially allowing the Arctic vessel a critical window to recover its full defensive capabilities. Whitfield relayed the urgent timeline to Ethan Marsh, who immediately communicated the critical deadline to Henry Dawson and the assembled squadron. Every pilot understood clearly that this would likely be their only opportunity to strike, before conditions shifted potentially in the enemy's favor once more. Henry gave the signal, and the squadron surged forward in a tightly coordinated formation, weapons systems fully engaged. The enemy vessel's defenses flickered weakly in response, attempting to generate a protective shield, though the effort proved only partially successful, given the ongoing interference from the key's disruption field far below. The first wave of strikes impacted the vessel's outer hull, causing visible damage along its previously undamaged surface. Sparks and small explosions flashed briefly against the dark backdrop of the Arctic sky, drawing a collective breath of anticipation from command centers monitoring the engagement across the globe. The enemy ship retaliated, unleashing a powerful beam of energy toward the approaching aircraft. Several pilots executed sharp evasive maneuvers, narrowly avoiding the attack, though one aircraft sustained minor damage, forcing its pilot to retreat temporarily from the engagement. Despite the setback, the remaining squadron pressed forward, undeterred by the enemy's continued resistance. Henry Dawson maneuvered his aircraft skillfully, positioning himself for a direct strike against what sensors identified as the vessel's primary power core, a critical weak point exposed by the earlier wave of coordinated attacks. He radioed his intentions to the rest of the squadron, requesting covering fire to protect his approach during the crucial final moments of the assault. Inside the Nevada facility, the countdown reached 5 minutes remaining before the key's scheduled cooldown period. Olivia Grant's hands trembled slightly as she monitored the readings, fully aware of how critical these final moments truly were. General Whitfield stood beside her, his expression tense but unwavering, silently willing the distant squadron toward success. Above the Arctic, Henry's aircraft closed in rapidly toward the vessel's exposed power core, weapons locked and ready. The enemy ship's remaining defenses attempted a final, desperate counterattack, firing wildly toward the approaching aircraft. Henry pushed his aircraft to its absolute limits, weaving skillfully through the incoming fire, refusing to abandon his approach despite the mounting danger. With mere seconds remaining before the key's disruption field would begin its scheduled reduction, Henry released his weapons directly toward the exposed core, followed immediately by supporting fire from the remaining squadron members positioned around him. The combined impact struck true, causing a massive, brilliant explosion that illuminated the entire Arctic sky in a blinding flash of light. The enemy vessel shuddered violently, its structure beginning to crumble under the force of the internal explosion, now spreading rapidly throughout its systems. Flames and debris scattered outward as the ship began its final, uncontrolled descent, crashing spectacularly into the vast, empty expanse of snow and ice below, far from any populated areas. Cheers erupted immediately across every command center monitoring the engagement, the overwhelming tension of the past several hours finally breaking into pure, unrestrained relief and celebration. Henry Dawson radioed confirmation of the successful strike, his voice filled with exhaustion and disbelief at having played a direct role in humanity's final, decisive victory. Inside the Nevada facility, General Whitfield turned to Olivia Grant, both of them sharing a brief, emotional moment of relief as the confirmation of the last enemy vessel's destruction appeared clearly across their monitors. Ryan Fletcher, watching from his own station, allowed himself a wide, exhausted smile, the weight of over a decade of tireless work finally lifting from his shoulders. Ethan Marsh, receiving the final confirmation at the Pentagon, immediately relayed the news to military commanders and government leaders around the world. Within minutes, official announcements began spreading rapidly across every available communication channel, confirming to a frightened, exhausted world that the invasion had officially ended in humanity's complete and total victory. In Denholt, Grace Sullivan and Sophie Callahan received the news through the small radio still playing steadily within the shelter. A wave of disbelief swept through the gathered crowd, quickly followed by overwhelming relief and joy. Strangers embraced one another, tears of happiness replacing the fear that had gripped them for what felt like an eternity, though in truth, the entire ordeal had unfolded in just 5 short hours. Emma Carter held her sleeping infant close, tears streaming down her face, as her husband wrapped his arms around them both, grateful beyond words that their small family had survived the night together. Around them, the shelter erupted into spontaneous celebration, exhausted survivors finally allowing themselves to feel genuine hope for the first time since the ordeal began. In Toronto, Nathan Pierce knelt down beside Oliver Hastings, informing the young boy gently that the danger had finally passed. Oliver's face lit up with a wide, relieved smile, and he threw his small arms around Nathan's neck in a tight, grateful hug. Around the community room, families embraced one another, the fear and uncertainty of the past several hours finally replaced by profound relief and gratitude. As dawn began breaking over cities around the world, people slowly emerged from shelters and safe rooms, blinking against the early morning light, taking in the sight of skies now finally clear of the massive alien vessels that had haunted them throughout the night. Though significant damage remained visible in several affected areas, the overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude far outweighed the lingering destruction. At the United Nations headquarters, world leaders gathered once more, this time not in desperate debate, but in solemn, grateful unity. The Secretary-General addressed representatives from every corner of the globe, formally announcing humanity's victory and expressing deep gratitude toward the scientists, engineers, and soldiers whose tireless efforts had made survival possible against seemingly impossible odds. General Whitfield, Olivia Grant, and their entire team received formal recognition for their decade-long dedication to Project Halcyon, their names finally revealed publicly after years of secrecy. Reporters gathered eagerly outside the Nevada facility, hoping to capture even a brief glimpse of the individuals responsible for humanity's unlikely salvation. Olivia, exhausted but deeply relieved, addressed the gathered press briefly, emphasizing that the true victory belonged not to any single individual, but to the countless people around the world who had shown remarkable courage, unity, and resilience throughout the crisis. She expressed hope that the lessons learned during this unprecedented event would inspire greater global cooperation moving forward, regardless of whether such technology would ever be needed again. In the days that followed, the world began the long, difficult process of recovery. Cities damaged during the brief but intense conflict slowly began rebuilding, communities coming together with renewed determination and unity forged through shared hardship. Grace Sullivan and Sophie Callahan, now close friends bound by their shared experience, volunteered together regularly at the very shelter where they had first sought safety, helping others rebuild their lives in the aftermath. Nathan Pierce returned to teaching, finding his classroom filled with students eager to share their own stories of courage and resilience from that unforgettable night. Oliver Hastings, now considered something of a small local hero among his classmates for his bravery during the crisis, often visited Nathan after school. The bond between them strengthened permanently by their shared experience. Henry Dawson received numerous honors for his role in the war's decisive final battle, though he remained humble, insisting that the true credit belonged to every single person, soldier and civilian alike, who had contributed toward humanity's survival throughout that extraordinary night. Months later, as life slowly returned to a new sense of normalcy, the world remained forever changed by the events of that single unforgettable night. Old rivalries and divisions, though not entirely erased, felt smaller and less significant in the face of what humanity had accomplished together. A fragile but genuine sense of global unity persisted, a lasting reminder of what people from every corner of the world could achieve when united by a common purpose. The story of that night, when humanity faced an enemy far beyond its own understanding and emerged victorious within a mere 5 hours, became a defining moment in human history. It stood as a powerful testament to courage, unity, and the remarkable strength found not in any single weapon or invention, but in the combined will of ordinary people refusing to surrender in the face of impossible odds. And though the skies above Earth remained quiet in the months and years that followed, humanity never forgot the lessons learned during those 5 extraordinary hours, lessons that would continue shaping the world for generations to come.